Hey everybody, welcome to Performance Anxiety. This week's show features founding member of the Lilacs, Ken Kurson. There's some discussion about family issues, college disappointments, working with Richard Lloyd of Television. We talk about the value of trade school and EPs. And then there's some Bozo serendipity. And then we talk about the new EP by the Lilacs. Go to their website, pick it up, check it out on all the streaming platforms. Go to Amazon, wherever you can find it, buy it. Check them out on social media at the Lilacs. Check us out on social media. Instagram and Twitter is at PerformanceANX. Facebook is Performance Anxiety. And go pick up some merch from us while you're at it at performanceanx.threadless.com. Remember to subscribe, rate, and review. And enjoy Ken Kurson of the Lilacs.
Hey, this is Ken Kurson. I'm the singer of the Lilacs from Chicago. We've got a new record, The Lilacs Endure, out now, and I'm thrilled to be talking about it on Performance Anxiety. You might get my wife in the background there a little bit. Let me make sure she's decent. She's doing a crossword puzzle.
No problem.
Melody, you want to wave to my new friend here? Mark, this is Melody.
Hi.
We're newlyweds, so pardon us if we're a little gooey after 1 year.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. 1
year, huh?
Yep.
Oh, man. You guys got some catching up to do. This year, my wife and I will be 18 years.
Jeez. That's when things went wrong for me.
Oh, no.
First time around, so.
Don't tell me. That's when things went wrong for my parents, too, at 18. So.
Ouch.
Yeah. I think we're going to make it, though. So you're from New York, New Jersey area.
You know, I grew up in Chicago, where I went to high school, and the bands for which I'm best known, Green and the Lilacs, would both consider themselves Chicago-based. But
Okay, so we'll just edit that completely out.
Yeah, that's fine.
So you're Chicago.
Anything you want me to repeat or anything, I'm happy to. But you mentioned, Mark, your parents having gotten divorced. My parents split up as well when I was about 14, and my mom always lived in New Jersey. So I moved to New York when I was 1993.
Okay.
So I was about 25, and I've lived in New York and New Jersey ever since.
Okay. I was basing that off of our earlier conversation. So it's you said like in the Maplewood area.
Yeah, I live in Maplewood.
All right, yeah.
So not too far from you. Yeah, you probably had Hurricane Floyd just about knock you out, right? That's the one that.
Yeah. Well, I was in New Jersey. All right, so let's see. I was born in Texas, moved to New Jersey, Virginia, back to New Jersey. And then I was in New Jersey from about fourth grade until I left for college. And I left for college in 91. And then that's when I went up to Rochester, New York, studied at RIT for a few years.
Great school.
Yeah. I had a weird experience there. It wasn't everything it wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. So it was a very strange experience for me. And I wasn't prepared for it. So it kind of threw me for a loop. So
it seems like you're like a creative guy, and I
Yes.
mean, I would think you'd have done fairly well there.
Well, I went there in the hopes that, and maybe this is my naivete, especially at the time, of thinking it was a very open place for sharing ideas. And the teachers there, the professors, did a great job of showing us how to do things and explaining how things work. But it was also, among the students, hyper competitive, which I wasn't prepared for. Because in my school, I was a photographer. There really weren't anybody else interested in it or doing it. So I did it all. And so when I got up there, I was used to sharing ideas and telling people how I did things and what we would do is we would have classes in studio work and in location work and back in the darkroom days, and then we would have critiques for every project that we had, and you'd pick with your teacher, your professor, you have 3 or 4 photos to put up on the wall, and then the class would critique them. I wasn't prepared for that because I took my work way too personally at the time. And then when I did find some work from a classmate that I really thought was excellent and I wanted to know how they did it, they were not open to sharing it at all.
Like protective of it.
Yeah, like, hey, I figured out how to do this. It got me an A. You got to figure out how to do it on your own.
It's strange to me because the first part I think is it can be unpleasant, but I think it's justifiable that this sort of everyone puts their stuff out there. I liken it to writing workshops I've been in, but the second part's just terrible. People have to be generous with their time, their praise, and everything else, or else what's the point? The whole point of getting people together in the same place to learn is that you benefit from the proximity to other people. If they're just there to A, hurt your feelings, and B, not uplift your technique, what's the point?
Exactly. And part of it, honestly, like I said, was being 18-year-old kid, always being told how awesome your stuff was, not being prepared for criticism. And the other part may have, my naivete in thinking that it was going to be an open sharing of ideas, and not that, people are competing for grades and eventually for jobs. And, not really realizing that point of view when I got there. So I've learned a lot. I learned a lot there. I've learned a lot since then. And I mean, I'm lucky enough to have been a professional photographer for a decade or more. And even though I don't do it professionally now, I still love going out and taking shots. And one of the cool things about doing this show is that I've met a lot of awesome people who, when they tour around this area, they'll hit me up and say, hey, we're going to be at the 930 Club, or we're going to be at this little bar. Why don't you come on? I'll give you a media pass and take some shots. Yeah,
we'll definitely do that. If the Lilacs wind up playing at the 930, which is legendary. I've played there with Green before. Or, when we used to come through Baltimore, it was the 8x10 Club. I don't know if you remember that place.
No, I don't remember that.
Sort of a late 80s place. I remember playing there with Scruffy the Cat and the Neighborhoods.
Oh, my gosh.
So, great club.
There's still a lot of great clubs in the area, too. So it's really, really a good spot for mid-sized live venues.
I actually really loved your photography, Mark. I had no idea that's something you pursued. I listened to a couple of your podcasts just so I could sort of walk in understanding a little bit about your style.
Right.
But the photography was a revelation to me. I think we'd be lucky to have you shoot us sometime if we're in the area.
That means the world to me. Thank you, man. I appreciate that. But let's talk about you guys. Ken, you are original member of the Lilacs, and I want to know a little bit about how you formed the band. I mean, because you were in, like you mentioned, another band before that called Green. How did the Lilacs form, I guess? What was the genesis of that?
So I was in Green from literally about 2 weeks after I graduated high school in summer of 1986 until the very beginning of 1991. Okay. And, you mentioned in your own past, you struggled a little bit once you got to college, and it wasn't what you expected. For me, I didn't go to college. So, I got to be 22-ish years old, and I was really hungry to start experiencing not only what my friends had experienced with college, but also, I always felt like I had to better myself. On the road when the other guys in Green, we played 200 plus shows a year. We're a popular band and touring around the world. But when the other guys would be having fun, I'd be, reading Madame Bovary or trying to, literally do math textbooks just because I felt like I was falling behind all my peers, and my hope and goal and ambition was to become a rock and roll star. But I realized that's a long shot in any case. And so I really wanted to try college. So I left Green, still loving the band, still very close to them to this day. But I really missed rock and roll. And so I wanted to form my own band. I was sort of, I was the bass player in Green, and it had this legendary singer-songwriter guy named Jeff Lesher, who, at least around the Chicago area, everybody knows and reveres. Right. But I wanted to try my own thing. And so a good friend of mine was a guy doing a power pop band called Material Issue.
I'm very familiar with Material Issue, yes.
Great. Well, the leader of that band was one of my closest friends, a guy called Jim Ellison. And he said, I'll imitate his Chicago accent for you a little bit. So he goes, I got a great name for your band. You got to call yourselves the Lilacs. So I was like, whoa, what a great name. So he named us the Lilacs, and then he was extremely generous with us when we were getting started, too. He produced our first record, The Lilacs Love You, and he even sort of, donated the studio time. They were recording, Material Issue was recording some demos for the follow-up to their hit first album. They were signed to a major label, Mercury. Yeah. So he took out all this time to produce us and donate studio time to us.
Wow.
And that's really why I founded the Lilacs, so that I could have, my own band where I could be the singer and write most of the songs. Okay. And I formed it with a bunch of high school friends. Our original drummer, John Packel, is one of my closest pals my whole life. In fact, when he went back to college himself, we replaced him with a different guy from my high school, Art Kim. And the other guy in the Lilacs, the other songwriter and singer, is a guy called David Levinsky, who was another high school friend. So I really wanted to be a band of brothers and not just mercenaries who happen to be great at their instruments.
Right, okay, well that makes sense, and I can totally understand your feelings of falling behind since you didn't go. I when I was in RIT, I ended up leaving early and not finishing my degree. Then 15 years later, going back and finishing. Getting a Bachelor of Science online, which hasn't really helped me all that much in what I do at this point. But I felt that same feeling of missing out on and not having that accomplishment that people are looking for. That whether you need it or not, people are looking for it.
Well, I admire you even for finishing, because I never did. I matriculated at the U of Chicago. And I went 2 years and I loved it. But first of all, I couldn't afford it. Yeah. And secondly, by the time I did 2 years there, I was 25 years old. I was dying to get started with my life. And I just basically on a whim, I drove from Chicago to New York to become, find my living as a writer. Always intending to go back to college and finish a degree. But happily, I've made a good career as a writer. And, I never had the time or really felt the inclination to go finish up college. So I remain a college dropout to this day.
Well, like I said, I think in this day and age, it's not always necessary. It's not as pressing a need as it used to be. It doesn't hold as much weight as it does. I think things like trade schools are so underrated at this point.
I agree totally. And apprenticeships, yes. And all kinds of ways of doing things. The college degree thing, it probably matters for your very first job, but once you've had that job, everyone's interested in what you did at your last job, not how you did in college. So
exactly.
I've written 5 books, I've written countless newspaper articles and magazine articles for the best regarded places in the world, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Esquire, etc. And nobody cares that I didn't finish college.
Yeah, nobody even asks, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So the Lilacs. You were named the Lilacs. You were christened the Lilacs. Was there any reason? Did Jim ever give you a reason why he liked that name or why he thought it was fitting for you guys?
He never really spelled it out, but I think what was happening is that there were a couple bands then, like the Posies, that were kind of and you can maybe even count Guns N' Roses in that sort of general named after flowers mix. So I think that Jim was a very strategic guy about the music business. This is a guy, in Chicago, the indie rock thing was to pretend you didn't care about success. So even as all these bands all around us were getting signed, Material Issue and Smashing Pumpkins and Urge Overkill, Liz Phair, even amid, a lot of successful bands kind of coming out of that scene, the big thing was you had to walk around Wicker Park and pretend you didn't care. So Jim was not into that at all. He was totally about his career. He had it all mapped out. He wanted to drive a cool car and wear a cool leather jacket so people would know what a success he was. And so, when he came up with the Lilacs, I think he was thinking, well, this is working for a lot of bands. We got bands, who are getting to be fairly big by doing that. You should do it too. I completely identify with that. I get it. I wanted to be a success also.
That makes complete sense. Now, did you guys, you formed in the late 80s, but your first EP didn't come out until 91. Was there a lot of just grind in there and a lot of touring? Or was there much studio time until the EP came out?
We went to the studio to record our first EP, and there was a delay. Gosh, memory fades. It's probably 27, 28 years ago. So I don't remember exactly what it was, but I was really in no hurry because, at this point, like I said, I was going to college, and I wanted to become a really good band. So one of my frustrations with Green, when I had been in Green, is that we had tremendous buzz. I mean, Jeff is I would say, after Curtis Mayfield, the greatest singer I ever knew who came from Chicago, and one of the greatest songwriters. So our records were almost universally praised, beloved by critics. But we'd go and do these important showcases in New York or Los Angeles where some important record label was going to come see us, and we just were not a powerful live band. We were not a tight live band.
Okay.
And I'll take whatever share of blame is mine for that. I was not as good at bass as I probably should have been. So with the Lilacs, especially since we were friends first and not studio musicians or something, I really wanted to get good, and we practiced a lot and rehearsed a lot, and I was in no real hurry to release stuff. So yeah, there was a little bit of a lag, but once we started putting stuff out, we started putting stuff out pretty quickly.
And at that time, and I don't know if this is, maybe it's coming back around to this, but bands were putting out EPs at first, and I like that idea. 2 to 4 songs before they came out with a full length, and there's a while there where that wasn't happening at all. I mean, bands were just putting out album after album, and it was maybe not as high quality, but they're just being pushed to put out stuff.
You're so right. Now in the iTunes era, it's really all about the single, but you're totally right. When especially when grunge happened, there was like this real feeling you have to have like a depth, a really sustained album to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
And the Lilacs as a pop band, where our entire concept was to be unashamedly poppy. I loved singles. We put out our 4 releases, 3 were 7 inches. Yeah. And the reason we're talking now, because of the new the first Lilacs record in 25 years, that's a 4-song release, and it's a perfect format for me. If we had 6 songs that were great, I would have done 6. If we only had 2 would have been fine. But at this point in my life, where we're not doing this for to try and make a living, right. I just want to put out the best songs we have. And we have 4 really great songs. I'm really proud of them. It was the honor of a lifetime to record with Richard Lloyd producing.
Who, by the way,
really thrilled this is getting out.
Who, by the way, is a former guest on this podcast.
Oh, no kidding! I looked through the whole. I must have missed that episode. I looked through like the last 40.
Yeah, he was fairly early on. I've released 51 or 52 at this point, and so he was fairly early on. It was a weird interview. He's a weird dude.
He's an exceptionally strange. I will use the pretentious phrase. He is sui generis. He is one of a kind. We really enjoyed working with him, and I learned a ton. But yes, a definitely unique character.
I'll give you a quick rundown of how the interview went, because my interviews last anywhere from 30 minutes to like 2.5 hours. So I mentioned this to him. I gave him the link to the show so he could check it out. And we get on, and first of all, I like video if possible, because if we can see each other, it lessens the chances of us talking over each other. I can see when somebody's about to say something, and vice versa. He gets on video for about 10 seconds. He goes, we don't need that. Click. just audio only. I'm like, okay, no problem. I'm fine with that. When I had Trey Gunn on, the phone was on video, but it was in his lap the entire time. So I got 90 minutes of Trey Gunn's crotch. So, but so Richard turned off the video. Then we're talking, and we go through his childhood, stories about him blowing up a Chinese laundry, all these crazy things that happened, and we get to the television era of his career, and he's like, I gotta go in a few minutes, just to let you know. Okay, so let's skip over television because that's pretty well documented. Tell me about working with Matthew Sweet. So it was a very strange interview. We totally bypassed his biggest band.
That sounds nuts to me, but I got to tell you that if you're really dying to fill in the gaps, I'm like an addicted reader of rock memoirs, and his is really good.
Oh, everything is combustible?
Yeah. It's really good. It goes through the stories you just mentioned, but the television stuff. And the good thing about Richard is he's still pretty angry about a lot of the stuff.
Really
sometimes when you read these memoirs and you're dying to read, the dirty, angry stuff, like, Keith Richards just brutalizes Mick Jagger.
Yes, read that one.
And I just saw the Rolling Stones for the very first time on Monday, and they have such chemistry on stage. And to me, it only was enhanced by the knowledge of how painful it's been between them at times.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean they're faking on stage. It means people are complicated. And, anybody you've said you've been married 18 years, I've been divorced. Anybody who's had a long marriage knows that there are times you absolutely love the person and want to kill them at the exact same time. So, so what I loved about Richard's memoir is he's kind of still holding a grudge against Tom. It's really I love that. So he's just incredibly honest and has this unbelievable memory. So it's a shame he didn't detail that for you on your podcast.
He kind of did, about not necessarily the television years, but his memory was on full display because he told me he remembered being born.
Yeah, he has said that in his memoir too. It just seems impossible.
It does.
What do I know?
Exactly. I mean, I can barely remember what I did last week, so
Well, I will tell you about Richard Lloyd that one of the reasons he agreed to produce our record. And I was scared to ask him, quite frankly, because his music is so ambitious and he's such a complex guitar player, and our music is just much more straightforward and simple. So one of the reasons I was nervous to approach him is that I thought he would sort of look down his nose at what we're trying to do. Right. But he and I know a lot of people in common. I live in the East Village, and sort of he's still well loved in that scene. So the reason I believe Richard's memory is as accurate as it is because all these people, and I'd say, hey, Richard Lloyd, they tell me these phenomenal stories about sometime they met him. So later, when I got to talking with him before, I was asking him if he wanted to produce us, I'd say, hey, Joe Smith said to say hi. Oh, I remember, Joe, we did this. And he'd tell me the exact same thing that they told me, even though to them it was a much more significant event. They were meeting the great Richard Lloyd. Yeah. To him, it was, often just some kid who was his admirer. He remembered everything. So his memory really is extraordinary.
He might be one of those people, and I've read books about this, that they can't forget. Like, I think Mary Lou Henner is actually one of these people.
I was just about to cite her. Yeah. You just mentioned she supposedly remembers every single day of her life. Yeah, and it's a curse.
Yeah, you can throw out any day. Like, what happened May 14th, 1980, and she'll know exactly what happened. And God, that would be horrible. There's so many things in my life I want to forget.
The bad days, right? Yeah. Like, would you just be reliving that time I said something really stupid to this person I love?
Yeah.
You'd just be reliving it over and over in a loop.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people think that would be amazing. You'd never forget anything. God, there's so many things I'm glad I don't remember.
You know what, Mark? There's analogies to pop music there, though, because like a lot of the songs on the Lilacs only did one full-length album, the Lilacs Rise Above the Filth.
Right.
And a lot of my songs on there are about this very tough breakup I went through in May of 1991. And I'd say the closest thing we ever had to a hit was our song "Hop in the Stanza" about my car, a Nissan Stanza.
Yes, I was watching the video today.
It played a big role in the breakup, and having to play that at every Lilacs gig for the next however many years, it kind of does put it. It's that same loop. It's like now, oh crap, I got because now I love and admire that person who I broke up with. It's all good terms. So you have to sort of replay these unfortunate incidents over and over and over. So it is a little bit like a memory loop.
I never thought of it like that. So you pour your heart and soul into creating this song, or even an entire album. It connects with people, and now you have to relive it every time you're on stage because everybody wants to hear that song or that
right.
The track
you got to sing it with real passion too.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a heavy emotional song.
God, I never thought of it that way. You're mentioning that one full length and 3 EPs. What caused the dissolution of the Lilacs back in 92, 3?
No, it was fall of '93 at our very peak. We had all these headlining shows booked all over the Midwest. It's really simple. I had to get out of Chicago. It was time to. I wanted to get out of music. I wanted to get out of Chicago. I wanted to get out of college. Everything. I just pulled the ripcord, so to speak. I wanted to move to New York and become a writer. And I felt like, God, if I don't do this, like literally right this minute, I'm never going to do it. So I packed up this crappy car that I had, this,
Stanza?
By then it was a Honda Accord, a terrible manual one that, was like 20 years old and had about 1,000 Chicago parking tickets on it. So I packed up this car with just, literally a couple of hefty bags of clothes.
Wow.
I asked my best friend to sell all my guitars back in Chicago and send me whatever he got for them. And I drove all night to be with my girlfriend in New York, and basically never looked back. I've lived in New York ever since.
Wow, that's amazing. I've often wondered if I would have the stones to do something like that, and I'm not at this point. No, because I'm married. I got 3 teenage kids, and they're all in high school and getting ready for college, and there's no way I could do it. But I mean, I did it. I lived in Alabama for years, and that's where I met my wife. All the kids were born there, and the job market where I was total trash. It was there's no opportunity. So we found a job back up here in Virginia and moved everybody back up without knowing anybody or anything. But just a complete change. It was still. I went from one sales job to another, so it was more. There was an opportunity there. It wasn't a I'm just cutting ties and I'm going and I'm pursuing this dream that I've got. So I admire you a lot for that. Is what I'm trying to say. That's amazing.
Well, I so appreciate you saying that, but I don't really even know how admirable anything I did was. I felt like I was suffocating, like I had to do it. It was, I don't know that I can honestly look you in the eye, and I'm glad we're on video because I don't think I did anything heroic. I think it was just like a save myself type moment. But I do want to follow up on something you said because we're on this podcast, which is that I re-listened to Shit Town. Which is totally set in Alabama. Yeah. And I think it really is like as good as the original serial. It is such at least as a portrait of a character. The main guy who's being portrayed in that podcast is so interesting.
Yes.
That, I love Alabama and I've been there many times. That was actually a state where green was popular. So we stayed there a few weeks and, yeah, and I had a friend who was imprisoned in near Montgomery, so I came to visit him a few times. And that podcast is really special. So.
Yeah, and I've listened. I haven't finished it yet. It's one of those I started listening to, and then something, I don't remember what happened, and because I started listening to it recently, actually. I listened to all of Serial, and then they started the second season of that, or second storyline in it, and then that came up as a suggestion, and I started listening to it, and I haven't gotten all the way through it yet, but
it's very compelling, and there's even sort of a twist toward the end. I can't think of a good way to do it without spoiling it. But if anyone is needing a break from performance anxiety, although why would you? I've been enjoying listening to it all day. So
thank you.
I really recommend Shit Town. I think it's a great one.
It's definitely a more serious topic, and I love Alabama. I lived there for 8-9 years. My wife was born and raised there, and everybody that I know there, my brother graduated from the University of Alabama. Still have a ton of family and friends down there. There was just no work. And it's hot as shit down there. Oh my God.
Yeah, it would seem pretty inhospitable to a certain kind of sort of knowledge worker.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you, my first sales job down there, after I had leaving photography, my wife finding out we're having our first child, and then needing a job with some insurance and all that, I got an insurance sales job, and I was going door to door during the day trying to sell insurance. And Southeast Alabama,
rough.
Oh, dude, Southeast Alabama,
rough.
Who is at home during the day? People who don't qualify for insurance. So
yeah, not insurance buyers.
No, so it was a rough job, and I would go out to my car, and it was maybe a 15 to 20 foot walk from my front door to my car, and by the time I got to my car door, I was already sweating. It was just so hot and humid. I was way down south in the southeast corner of the state, down near Dothan, right off of Fort Rucker. And it was just hot. It's like you live in a bowl of warm pea soup.
Yeah. Well, there's a certain type of person who really loves that. And I mean, I got to put on Drive-By Truckers on a pretty regular basis. And
love those guys.
I really think that, there's without that heat, the exact weather you're describing, there might not be a Jason Isbell. So,
and it's funny because I didn't even really get into the Drive-By Truckers until after I left the state, but listening to it, that's the sound of Alabama. That's what Alabama sounds
exactly.
like.
It's just what it feels like. That's really well put, Mark.
It is amazing. So all right. So the band dissolves, and you start writing. 25 years go by, and you guys decide to get back together. How did that all happen?
Yeah, I want to tell you that story and share it with your listeners, because I wish I had sort of heard this story, 10 years earlier than I lived it. So in 2015, I got divorced after 19 years of marriage, and a warm, happy marriage with 3 great kids during probably 17 or 18 of those years, and then things just went to shit really fast. And in working through it, first through marriage counseling, and then through continued counseling on my own, I started to realize that I had fallen into some really bad ruts, and I took a hard look at myself and said, okay, things aren't working. My career, my professional life was off the charts. I had achieved all of my goals. I was the editor-in-chief of a newspaper in Manhattan, which, to me was like the pinnacle of what I came out there to do. But I let my personal relationships atrophy. And so one of my goals was to start saying yes to things I had said no to, and also no to a few things that I had said yes to. So from time to time over the course of 20 years or so in New York, I'd get asked, mostly in Chicago where I'm from, but all over the country, hey, why don't you put the band back together and do a reunion show? Or, wow, it's the 15th anniversary of this. Why don't you come out and do a reunion show? And I always said no, reflexively. And all of a sudden, in sort of late 2016, this guy, I had a reason to talk to Joe Shanahan, who runs Chicago's biggest and best rock club, the Cabaret Metro.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And he said, I always loved that Lilacs record. I always kept it on my table here. Sometimes people still ask about it. You ever think about getting back together? I said, yes, I do. So it was the most pathetic kind of like self-help, reaction.
Stuart Smalley kind of thing.
Exactly. It's exactly like Stuart Smalley. And it's funny to mention that because I've been thinking about. Well, anyway, so I said to Joe, I'm only going to do this if on two conditions. One, all the original guys want to do it. I don't want it to be, Ken Kurson and, three schmoes who I don't really know. And right. Two, I will only do it if we can be good. I don't want. I had just recently seen Styx and Foreigner, and and they're all like pretty old.
Yeah.
And Styx was awesome. They sounded really good. They sort of had a fake Dennis DeYoung, and he was always kind of the most annoying member of that band anyway. So,
I agree.
But then Foreigner was terrible.
Really?
Just awful. Going through the motions. It was all fake guys except for Mick Jones, and Mick was really sort of enfeebled by that point. And I thought, better to burn out than to fade away. Like if I can do this and be more like Styx or like the Rolling Stones I saw Monday night, who were great, I'll do it. If it's more like the Who, where they have to sort of stand in these isolation chambers, and or Foreigner, where they were just terrible, I don't want to do it. So
right.
I talked to the guys. Everyone was as enthusiastic for their own personal reasons. It fit into everyone's life. And so we got together, we practiced, we sounded pretty damn good. And then we played this show, and it was amazing. It went great. The fans were great. There was even a few new fans, and seeing some of the guys' kids in the audience was a treat for me. I remember at that show, all three of the other Lilacs had their kids there, their spouse there, and their parents there. All three of them. And
oh wow!
My parents are dead. I had no spouse. My kids didn't make it. They're back in New Jersey.
Oh.
And I thought, oh man, the rock and roll life, Yeah. But that's where there's a nice story. Now I'm married again, and my kids are really into coming to see the band when we have stuff to do. So, and my ex-wife even comes to the show sometimes. So,
oh, wow.
Everything's come around, and I think that I don't know you well enough to be giving you psychological advice, but I certainly don't know your listeners. But I do think I've tried really hard to keep saying yes to things that I had said no to, and it's working out for me beautifully.
That's a great story. I'm so glad to hear that. It's funny. My parents have been divorced longer than they were married, and they still can't talk to each other. So it's
right. And for what, right? And for what reason?
It's
who wins?
Insane. Yeah, exactly. They're both with different people now. They both have their own different lives. Yeah. I tell you, I have two siblings. I have a younger brother and a younger sister, and we're all married. And the weddings were the most awkward things on the planet. It was just trying to keep my parents separated. It was half of the, and they don't actively go and try to fight with each other, but there's always something going on. They just can't stand to be in the same room with each other. So I'm glad to hear that it works out for some people. Sometimes that's nice to hear.
It's interesting that you said that about your younger siblings, because I have three kids. I have five now that I'm remarried, but so my sort of three, one of them, the middle one had her bat mitzvah right after we got divorced, and that was very awkward and very tough.
Oh, I can imagine.
My ex-wife and I basically, she planned everything, and she did all the work, but it was very hard for us to be on the same page. But 2 years later, when our youngest daughter had her bat mitzvah, we were totally on the same page. We planned everything together. In fact, my current wife and my ex-wife were totally in charge of everything. We all got along great. Everyone was kind to each other. Even my ex-mother-in-law sort of gave me a hug when I saw her.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a shocker. naturally, I checked for anthrax spores, which she might have placed on my shoulder. But so far, so good.
Yeah, you're still here. That's good.
So, I don't know your parents, obviously, Mark, but I really I don't see the point. I don't see who wins. And I'm a politics guy and a strategic guy. And if there's not a winner, then you're probably the loser.
Yeah, you're so right. And it's something we brought up to them too. And it's getting better over the past probably, and it's taken this long, probably only 2 to 3 years. It's gotten a little bit better. And like I said, they've been divorced longer than they were married. So it's just insane. One thing I wanted to ask you about, and I say that a lot because every time I think of something, that's apparently the phrase that comes out of my mouth. But I wanted to know.
You're like Columbo. Just one more thing.
One more thing. You were recording in the late 80s, early 90s, and then in 2018, 2019, what's the biggest difference that you've seen in recording and releasing music in from the 90s to the 20 teens, I guess?
Well, the recording, I mean, the technology is just it like every other piece of technology in every single other way. It's night and day. How perfect, almost annoyingly perfect, things can be on Pro Tools. We were looking for these guitar sounds, and every single guitar pedal effect that you could possibly imagine is just a keyboard click away.
Right.
I remember going to all these different music stores and trying to find that exact old MXR that had the sound before some other company bought it. It was ridiculous. Now every pedal that's ever been invented is stored in someone's brain, and every take on what's going to be the single off this record, which is called Monica. There's this really good bass fill that our bass player sort of forgot to do in the third time through the chorus. And it was like way after we had, sort of put our instruments away and nothing was mic'd anymore. And I'm like, oh man, now we have to reset up. And he's like, no, I'm just going to grab it from the earlier one. I'm like, what? You can do that?
Yeah.
And it literally took, 2 seconds. That would have been a physical splicing thing with, razor blades and tape and stuff. So that technology is vastly improved, mostly to the good, but not always. We recorded in Nashville at Studio 19, which had been founded by Scotty Moore, Elvis's guitar player. So this is a very legendary place to be with a lot of analog equipment. But right across the hall from us, a hip hop artist was recording, and this was, the guy just sounded horrible. Like his rhymes were really inventive and his writing was excellent, but like his meter was terrible. But they used the auto tune to such obnoxious effect that to me it wasn't an improvement. The technology didn't help. As far as the releasing of the records, that's totally new. I mean, we're actually putting, this is coming out on a physical CD, so people will be able to experience it in the old-fashioned way of buying something. And
that's the way I do it.
Even though CD is obviously, that itself is newish technology compared to most of recorded music history.
Right.
It's really the streaming that has completely altered how you got to think about music and the music business and music sales. It's just a completely different world.
But it actually kind of works with your history, since a lot of your releases were singles or EPs.
Yeah, so we always were built around hit singles and trying to make songs that were popular on their own.
I was just talking the other day with somebody. Gosh, I don't even remember who it was now, about how the industry has changed. It's going back to what it was in the 50s, where artists were just releasing singles and LPs weren't a concern. Now it's kind of going back to the same. People are just writing a song, recording it in their house, using Pro Tools to make it sound professional, and then releasing it in a week.
Yep. No, that's true. And I don't know that that's a great thing, but if the song's great, I'm so happy to have it, I just was hearing some live music a week and a half ago, I guess. I was in a club in Chicago when I was visiting. I actually wrote and directed a short documentary that just came out. So we're premiering it in a few cities around the country. And so my brother hosted one of these premieres in Chicago. So I was back in my hometown and took my wife out to one of the bars that was my old stomping grounds. We heard a really great band called Imperial Sound, where I know some of the guys in it.
Okay.
And one of their songs was a lot of their songs actually, but there's one in particular, a song called June, July, and August, was so catchy that the ability to hear it and then instantly on the way home, get it on my iTunes and play it over the stereo in the car. It sounds great over Bluetooth. To me, that's a big improvement over trying to remember the tune to something for 6 weeks and hope that you'll recall it the next time you see the band, and then wait another 6 months for them to record it.
Yeah,
so
and then
there
hopefully
are some improvements.
And then hopefully the record store carries it.
Yep.
Otherwise, it needs back to mail order. If you can remember everything. What was the atmosphere like at Studio 19? I mean, that's a legendary place. I mean, Scotty Moore. I mean.
I thought the atmosphere was really great. I feel like I'm sensitive to my environment and can kind of perceive, the word in Hebrew is neshama, the soul of a place.
Okay.
But that's probably BS, because toward the end of our recording there, when I was totally soaking up this experience, the guy said, this isn't really the same physical place as it was when Scotty Moore owned it. It moves it. I'm like, I thought I saw his ghost. So it's probably BS, but I will tell you, it's a great sounding room. I mean, the main room there, it's a very live, open room, and yet it's covered in wood, so you get this really nice soaked, overtones. Our drummer is just this unbelievably hard-hitting guy. His nickname is the Freight Train.
Oh, geez.
And when you could really hear the wood of drums in a room, is very special to me. That's when I feel like a room really makes a difference.
Were the 4 songs on the EP all new tracks, or did you go back into the old database and pull out some old ideas that you'd been working on?
Exactly half. So the hit Monica, their single, I should say, is an old song that I wrote in 1993, but we never had a chance to record it. Another band called the Returnables did record it on album, and it became something of a signature song for them.
Oh, cool.
But the Lilacs never had a chance to record it, so I always wanted to record it, and it came out great. And then we have a ballad on there called Blue Spark by David Levinsky. Oh, yeah, no, it's a great song. And that was also from the old days, although we updated it. This crazy, wild keyboard player showed up at the session, and we just had him go nuts on an organ solo on it. And then we have 2 new songs, one by me called I Saw Her First song I'd written in over 20 years, and one by David called Shadow of Doubt, which I think will be our next video.
Cool.
It's a really visual song.
My tongue is shaded, lips are red, my words have faded. All alone, no one to blame. Well, I need somebody, I need somebody. Lost in the shadow of doubt, hands are bound.
In the past, you've described the sound of the Lilacs as a CD remastering of organ grinder music.
Yeah, that's funny.
Have you changed
that's kind
that
of what we're talking about here. It's like I like old stuff, brought to you through the wonders of modern technology. When we play live, we play real guitars going through tube amps.
Right.
And it's not because we're some sort of hidebound traditionalists. It's more that's just our aesthetic. But at the same time, I want the stuff to sound really crisp, and I don't want to present the Lilacs as like a garage band with sort of self-conscious lo-fi. I really want it to sound good.
Yeah, that can get obnoxious anyway.
Yep.
So now, you've also cited when you were, I guess, in the early '90s, the influences on the band were the band on Bozo Circus before it went to one guy on a synthesizer, which I thought was a brilliant response. Isaac Hayes, Curtis Mayfield, Sam and Dave, the Stylistics, the Ink Spots, T-Rex, and Masters of the Obvious. Have you expanded on that in the 25 years that you haven't been really playing music? Have there been any new influences that have come in?
Yeah, tons. I'm a huge consumer of music, including new music. I'm definitely not someone who's like, well, nothing good has been recorded in 20 years. I love tons of bands. Although I will say, I remember the quote that you're referring to where I listed those. I think that was in the Chicago Tribune.
Yes.
And I'm very proud of myself at age 22 or whatever to have gotten the Ink Spots and the Stylistics.
I know.
Good on me for remembering those guys.
That almost hit me as hard as the Bozo Circus part. That the comedy side of me really appreciated that one.
Yeah, I didn't realize then that Bozo Circus, like when you're a kid growing up in Chicago, that's like the biggest thing in the world. I didn't realize that it's basically a regional TV show. That if you say that to a New Yorker, or my wife who's British, they have no idea who you're talking about when you say Bozo.
Oh my gosh, I used to watch it. I guess it was on TBS because we got cable in the mid '80s, late '80s, and that's how my dad knew Bozo because I guess when you only had like 3 channels, that was one thing that was popular. I guess it was I was thinking Wilford Brimley, but he was Ronald McDonald. But he would mention it to me. Then growing up, I would watch the one on, I guess it was TBS would play it because it was one of the things my parents would actually let me watch was Bozo Circus. So,
yeah, no, I think it's because it was on WGN, not TBS, and WGN was an early superstation.
Okay, maybe that's what it was. Yeah,
yeah, and in an incredibly bizarre coincidence, so Bozo it just loomed so large. Like you had the day your kid was born. If you lived in Chicago, you'd send away for tickets because it took like 7 years to get them. That's how popular it was. So Bozo was such a legend, and an incredible coincidence. Our drummer, John Valley, his girlfriend or wife is the daughter of the guy who played Bozo.
Oh my God!
I don't know how that happened or why, but it does come full circle.
Bozo serendipity. That's amazing. That is amazing.
Yeah, I
will tell you that talking about the technology and all, and the sound, I really do love the sound on the older stuff and the new stuff. I mean, you've got a very gritty sound. Even on the songs like Pointless.
Thanks so much. That I love that song. That's actually my very favorite Lilacs song. And we've been lucky to have really good producers throughout the career of the Lilacs who have all gone on or had great associations in their past. So the first record was produced by Jim Ellison. We already talked about him. A songwriter with a lot of hits, had great success in his own bands. Then Brad Wood kind of took us under his wing. Brad went on to produce Liz Phair and hundreds of other terrific artists. And, he's a great musician as well. And then to work with Richard Lloyd, who's a legend and says no to most stuff, but took this on because he, as he put it to me, he smelled a Cars-like potential, and he always felt that the Cars were the hit commercial version that television should have been. So that's like such an honor to me. First of all, I love the Cars, but secondly, that he considered us in the same breath with television and the Cars is really meaningful to me. So we've benefited from great leadership from our producers, and I appreciate you listening with such care. Oh gosh,
I love Pointless. It's to me, I listened to it, and the first thing I thought of was that the song itself was actually several years ahead of its time, because it starts off with an acoustic, almost like a I don't want to say maybe Goo Goo Dolls, but something what would become popular in the mid 90s, like an Edwin McCain type of acoustic riff, and then it just becomes like Soul Asylum Mudhoney.
Yeah, well, wow. That's huge praise. Dave, the writer and singer of that song, is gonna love hearing this on the podcast. So I hope this makes the final edit. That's huge praise. And we used to sometimes play with this band called the Junk Monkeys, who were from Detroit and were somehow very close friends with the Goo Goo Dolls. So that was right about the era when Goo Goo Dolls were. This is sort of before they had hit singles with like Boy Named Goo and Name. But they were starting to have these replacements. Sound, didn't they? Yeah, they had exactly. They had I think their first hit was There You Are, which sounded exactly like something from like Tim era replacements.
Yeah.
And the Lilacs definitely, were on high alert when we heard them, because it was like, wait a minute, this is a band that has some indie cred, but is clearly trying to write hit singles, and that's what we were all about. So I can't wait for Dave to hear this podcast, actually, because he's going to love hearing that about Pointless.
Well, it's got a great fuzz tone on the guitars, and most of the music does. And back then and now, did you use vintage equipment? And I guess, something brand new back then would now almost be considered vintage at this point. So.
Yeah, no, even then we were using what was then vintage, partly out of, fetishizing old stuff, and partly out of poverty. We just used our old stuff that we had. But that was definitely a big value for us. So that's recorded. The guitar sounds there are Dave's Les Paul Custom, which is a semi-hollow body, which is a rare Les Paul through Fender Twin Amp, tube deluxe reverb. So I want to tell you a little bit about that record too, since you mentioned that song, and I love that song. And that's that we recently remastered it. So I told you Brad Wood had produced it. It always bothered me that I didn't have a good MP3 version of both that song Pointless and the other side of that record, which the song is one of my songs called Have I Told You, which is the only song I ever wrote with this guy, Paul Kay.
Okay.
We wrote it together, and he's a legendary songwriter out of Lexington, Kentucky, who's, he's like one of those guys like Lou Reed, where he's not as famous as he should be, but tons of people who did get famous were influenced by him.
Right.
So like the Afghan Wigs have covered his songs, and lots of other bands.
Oh, wow.
So Paul and I wrote this song, Have I Told You, together, and Dave wrote his masterpiece, Pointless, and we put that out as a record, but somehow it was mastered horribly.
Oh, really?
And then worse than that, my MP3 version of the bad master is like even worse.
Oh my God.
For 20 plus years, I've had this like crappy version of my very favorite Lilacs songs. So about 6 months ago, I called Brad. He lives in Los Angeles now, where he's making a good living as a producer. I think he's working with Liz Phair again too.
Oh,
speaking
wow.
of bands getting back together. And I said, hey, can you dig out the master of that? I'm actually thinking, finally at age 50, I have a few bucks. So, I'd like to hire you to remaster this thing, because it's always bothered me. And he looked, and he had like every session, like 200 sessions before it, 200 sessions after it. But somehow that day just didn't make it to digital audio tape.
Oh my God.
So I felt so upset about it. So he actually, as a favor to me, he took the record, the physical 45, and, using some Pro Tools and stuff, he beefed it up a little bit, but it wasn't that big of an improvement.
Okay.
And then he said to me, if you're still in touch with whatever label released that, they might have the digital audio tape too, because I always made one for me and then gave one to the label. I'm like, yeah, I'm still in touch with them. So I called the guy, Jason Cohen from Dead Dog Records, and he had it. He had it like right there. And it's so ironic because he's moved like probably 15 times since then. He's a rock and roll journalist, a great one. But he's lived all over the country, and I couldn't believe it. He found it in 2 seconds. So we sent it to Brad, and then Brad, just as a favor to us, he's like, look, I'm an engineer and producer. I'm going to give this to LA's like best mastering guy. He does like real bands, huge bands that have platinum selling albums. And I just got this back. I'm telling you, Mark, it's like hearing a great band do our songs. It's night and day. It's like we've never sounded this powerful live or on record before. It's really exciting to hear. So I'm going to actually send you that when I get it's like a WAV file now. It's like 60. It's a giant file. I can't even email, but I'm going to get one. And I'll email it to you because you're a fan of that song. I'll send you Pointless.
Thank you very much. I loved it. I think out of the earlier stuff, it's probably my favorite song. I love that. I really love it. And I'm really digging the new EP. And
thank you.
What I like is that the sound has matured a bit. You still have the great fuzz out tones, but it's matured. You still have the snarl from the earlier stuff, but it's not as, I don't want to say it's not as vicious. It's just matured a bit. It's like Iggy Pop with a little bit of Jeff Tweedy in there.
Well, those are two great comparisons. Thank you.
I've been listening to it for several days now, and I've really been enjoying it.
Mark, that's music to my ears.
Where can everybody find the new album? Because it's coming out, I believe, the day I'm releasing this show, so on the 16th. Where can people find the album or the EP?
Yeah, I think starting August 16th, the Lilacs Endure will be available on all streaming platforms. So iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, and I also we're doing a physical release. I don't know if the record store business at this point, with so many places closed, is as efficient as it once was, but hopefully it can be ordered from Amazon. You can go to thereallilacs.com, or probably better yet, to go to Pravda Music and find it. That's our record label. So they have a successful mail order business, and it'll get it out to you. Hopefully it'll be as ubiquitous as a small 4-piece band from Chicago could make it.
That's fantastic, man. Thank you. I really appreciate you taking so much time with me, and I know I've kept you a while. I really, really like the album.
Thank you for the thoughtful questions and the real. Your edits of these shows are good too, and they're pretty seamless. If
somebody wants to come on, the least I can do is actually take the time to learn about what you guys do. So,
great. Thank you.